Jack's childhood ended on the day his parents pulled into the driveway of the boarding school. Before this, he had been living with his aunt and cousins, relatives who actually loved him. His aunt would tuck him in at night, and his uncle would carry him on his shoulders at local fairs. He felt safe. But then, his parents suddenly reappeared, claiming they were ready to be a family again. Jack thought he was finally going home. Instead, they drove him straight to a cold, gray institution. They told him it was for discipline, a place to make him a man. They made it sound like a gift, but the look in their eyes was one of relief, not love. For the next 2 years, Jack lived in a cycle of silence and isolation. Every visiting day, the school courtyard filled with the sounds of laughter and the sight of other children running into their parents' arms. Jack would sit on the cold stone steps or hide in his dorm, staring at the gate, waiting for a car that never came. He stayed up at night crying into his pillow, muffling the sound so the older boys wouldn't bully him for being weak. After months of silence, Jack finally gathered the courage to call home. His hands shook as he dialed the number, his heart pounding with a tiny, desperate spark of hope that they had realized their mistake. But when his father picked up, his voice was annoyed, as if Jack was an unwanted telemarketer. Jack pleaded, promising to be good, promising to work harder and stop crying if they would just let him come home. Then, the background noise killed his spirit. He heard a baby girl crying, his sister, a child he didn't even know existed. But it was his mother's voice that broke him. She spoke to the baby with a soft, gentle, and melodic warmth, the kind of motherly love Jack had spent 10 years starving for. She had never once spoken to him that way. In that moment, the truth hit him like a physical blow. They didn't send him away to help him, they sent him away to clear space for a better version of a family. He wasn't just away at school, he had been erased and replaced. That was the day the light in Jack's eyes went out. A switch flipped inside his chest, and the boy who hoped for love died right there in the phone booth. With his biological parents gone and his heart turned to ash, Jack became a blank slate. The only person who seemed to notice the hollowed-out boy was the dean. To the other students, the dean was a terrifying figure of authority, a scarred former soldier with eyes like flint. But to Jack, the dean was the first person in years to look at him and see something worth keeping. The dean didn't offer hugs or kind words, he offered a different kind of salvation, power. He began taking Jack into the deep, ancient woods behind the school. These weren't nature walks, they were lessons in erasure. The dean taught Jack how to move through the undergrowth without snapping a single twig, how to control his breathing until it matched the rhythm of the wind, and how to track prey until he was practically a ghost behind them. A man without control, the dean would whisper in his ear, is just a storm waiting to destroy himself. You must become the silence, Jack. The most dangerous lesson, however, was detachment. During their hunts, the dean forced Jack to watch the light fade from the eyes of the animals they caught. He taught Jack to separate his mind from the act of killing, telling him that emotions were just a chemical weakness that got men killed. On Jack's 14th birthday, the dean didn't give him a toy or a book. He handed him a real, military-grade knife, its blade cold and razor-sharp. He taught Jack how to sharpen it until it could shave the hair off his arm. Precision is respect, the dean would say while guiding Jack's hand. If you are going to end a life, do it with the perfection of a surgeon. No hesitation, no regret. Jack began to worship the man. He saw the dean as a dark father, a man who actually cared enough to prepare him for a cruel world. He didn't realize that the dean wasn't raising a son, he was carefully carving away Jack's humanity, sharpening him like that knife into a tool of pure, cold violence. Jack felt strong for the first time in his life, unaware that the dean was slowly molding him into a monster that could never fit back into the world of normal people. Just as Jack was becoming a creature of the shadows, a single light flickered into existence, Hazel. She was the daughter of the local milkman, a girl who smelled of hay and wildflowers, and who carried a warmth that the cold stones of the boarding school could never extinguish. While the dean was teaching Jack how to take life, Hazel was inadvertently teaching him how to value it. They began meeting in a secret clearing deep within the woods, the same woods where Jack practiced his lethal silence. But with Hazel, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of a predator, it was the peace of two souls finding shelter in each other. Under the pale moonlight, they would sit by small, hidden campfires, sharing dreams that Jack had long ago buried under layers of iron and ice. Hazel talked about the farm, the birth of new lambs, and the rhythm of the seasons. Jack, for the first time in years, spoke about a future that didn't involve a knife or a hunt. He imagined a life of quiet mornings and hard, honest work, a life away from the dean's cold gaze and his parents' betrayal. To Jack, Hazel was a miracle. She looked at him without the fear the other students had, and without the calculating pride the dean showed. She saw the boy beneath the soldier. To mark his devotion, Jack used the small savings he had earned from chores to buy her a silver feather pendant. When he fastened it around her neck, he felt a strange, terrifying sensation in his chest: humanity. For that brief moment, the switch that had flipped off years ago flickered back on. He started to believe that the dean was wrong, that he wasn't just a tool for the hunt. He began to hope that he could be a man who loved, a man who built things instead of breaking them. The silver feather resting against Hazel's skin became his anchor to the real world. He convinced himself that if he could just hold on to her, the darkness the dean had planted in his soul would never take root. He was a boy falling in love, blissfully unaware that in the dean's world, love wasn't a sanctuary, it was a target. The fragile dream of a future with Hazel didn't just end, it was incinerated. It began with a silence that felt heavy and wrong. Jack waited in their secret clearing until his limbs grew numb from the cold, but the woods remained empty. The next morning, the world turned upside down. News reached the school that Hazel's father had been found dead on his farm, his life taken with a brutal, calculated precision. But the real horror came when the police arrived. They weren't looking for a thief or a drifter. They named Hazel as the prime suspect. Jack's mind recoiled. The girl who cried over injured birds, the girl who saw the good in a broken boy like him, could never have committed such an atrocity. He tried to speak up, to tell them where she was, but the school environment had shifted. The atmosphere became suffocating. The teachers and staff began acting with a fake niceness that made Jack's skin crawl. They smiled too wide, they checked on him too often, and their eyes were filled with a strange, predatory pity. It was as if they were all reading from a script, watching him, waiting for him to snap. Jack's instincts, the ones the dean had sharpened so carefully, screamed at him that the truth was hidden within the school's own walls. His suspicion turned into cold certainty when he spotted the school cleaner, a man who usually moved like a shadow in the periphery. Jack saw something metallic glinting in the man's trembling hand. It was the silver feather pendant. But it wasn't shining anymore, it was matted with dark, dried blood. In that moment, the son the dean had raised took over. Jack didn't call for help, he didn't go to the authorities. He dragged the cleaner into a secluded storage room, locking the door behind them. The interrogation that followed was not the work of a boy, but of the predator the dean had molded. Jack used every ounce of the detachment he had been taught. He didn't see a man, he saw an obstacle. Under the weight of Jack's cold, terrifying fury, the cleaner finally shattered. Through tears and blood, the truth poured out: Hazel hadn't run away. She hadn't killed her father. She had been taken. The cleaner confessed that she was being kept in the forbidden basement, a place of old wartime tunnels that were supposed to be sealed off. The man's final words chilled Jack to the bone. The dean didn't just know about it, he was the architect. The nightmare wasn't. Jack didn't just open the basement door, he tore through it with the strength of a man who had already lost his soul. As he descended into the bowels of the school, the air grew thick with the metallic tang of old blood and the suffocating stench of decay. He flicked on a dim light, and the reality of the dean's lessons was finally revealed. This wasn't just a basement, it was a museum of human agony. Glass cases and wooden shelves were lined with horrific trophies, locks of hair, teeth, jewelry, and weathered bones, each meticulously labeled like biological specimens. These were the people who had gone missing over the years, the ones the dean had used to practice his precision. And there, in the center of the room, chained to a rusted metal post, was Hazel. She was a ghost of the girl he had met in the woods. Her clothes were torn, and her spirit was nearly extinguished. Jack rushed to her, his hands shaking as he tried to break the cold iron of her shackles. Her eyes fluttered open, finding his face one last time. In a voice as thin as parchment, she whispered the words that would haunt him forever. "I love you, Jack." Then, with her final breath, she pulled him close and gasped the truth. The dean and the teacher hadn't just taken her, they had murdered her father together to clear the way for Jack's final transformation. As Hazel's head fell limp against his chest, something inside Jack didn't just flip, it shattered into a million jagged pieces. The grief was so immense that it surpassed tears, it turned into a white-hot, vibrating frequency of pure violence. The heavy door at the top of the stairs creaked open. The dean and the teacher walked in, their faces wearing expressions of calm, almost parental pride. They expected to find a broken boy they could comfort and control. They were wrong. Jack didn't scream. He didn't sob. He stood up slowly, his fingers curling around a heavy, iron crowbar he had found on the floor. He moved with the predatory grace the dean had spent years perfecting. Before the teacher could even raise a hand, Jack lunged. Every ounce of the pain he had held back since age 10, every night of loneliness, every betrayal from his parents, and every bruise from the school's bullies, was channeled into a single, devastating swing. The crowbar connected with a sickening crunch. Jack didn't stop until the teacher was no longer a threat, and no longer a man. He stood over the body, chest heaving, his face splattered with the cost of his vengeance. He turned his eyes toward the dean, the man who had created this monster. The hunt wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The silence that followed the violence was the loudest thing Jack had ever heard. He stood in the center of that horrific basement, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. He didn't look at the dean's broken body with triumph, he looked at it with the cold, hollow realization that the man had achieved his goal after all. The dean had wanted to create a masterpiece of detachment, and in his death, he had finally succeeded. Jack moved through the dean's private office like a phantom. In a hidden safe behind a portrait of a battlefield, he found them, the secret journals. They were a meticulous record of decades of depravity. Every name, every date, and every trophy in the basement was catalogued with the same chilling precision the dean had tried to teach Jack. It was the proof the world needed to know that the school wasn't a place for discipline, it was a hunting ground for a monster. When the police sirens finally wailed in the distance, Jack didn't run. He walked out of the school's front gates, the journals gripped in his blood-stained hands. He handed them to the first officer he saw without saying a single word. The headlines the next morning would speak of a hero student who exposed a serial killer, but Jack felt like anything but a hero. To him, the sirens were a funeral dirge for the boy he used to be. The investigation lasted months. The school was shuttered, the remaining staff were arrested, and the replacement family Jack's parents had built tried to reach out to him, sensing the publicity. But Jack didn't answer. To him, they were just shadows from a life that belonged to someone else. Jack's final act was to return to the clearing in the woods one last time. He sat where he and Hazel had once whispered about a farm and a future. He took out his own journal, the one he had kept since he was 10 years old. He looked at the early pages, filled with the messy handwriting of a child who just wanted to go home. He turned to the very last page and picked up a pen. "The boy who wanted a home is gone," he wrote, his hand steady and devoid of emotion. He died in that basement the moment Hazel's heart stopped. He was replaced by the precision, the silence, and the iron. "I look in the mirror and I don't see a person, I see a set of rules carved into bone. I am the silence the dean taught me. I am the blade he sharpened. I am no longer human. I am just what remains." Jack closed the book, left the silver feather pendant on the stump where they used to sit, and walked into the trees. He didn't look back. He had become exactly what the world had forced him to be. A ghost haunting his own life, a weapon with no one left to strike, and a man who finally had the discipline his parents asked for, at the cost of everything that made him real.